Okay.
Welcome Wargamers, this is Doug with 2 Plus Stuff, and in this video we're talking all about the GHB 2019. So for those of you who are brand new players, I know there are quite a few of you because you comment quite frequently about it. If you don't know what the GHB is, the General's Handbook, that is to say, is a yearly publication that GW puts out for Age of Sigmar, that it has a lot of different things. We're going to talk about them all in detail, but really what it is game support for their 3 types of play. That is to say, open play, when it doesn't matter what models you bring or any kind of that. It's very open rules as far as how you interact with your opponent. There's narrative play, which is a little more structure, where you and your opponent are trying to tell a story, and matched play, which is for a lot of like organized tournament focused type stuff, where you and your opponent have kind of theoretically equal forces pitting off against one another in very specific symmetrical battle plans. Now, typically with the old General's Handbook, I'm just going to say GHB for the rest of this video, just to make it simple. Basically, the points were always in the back, and for some factions that don't have battle tomes, they had allegiance abilities and stuff like that in there. They did something a little bit different this year that I'm a huge fan of, in that they actually divorced the points from the General's Handbook itself. So while this part of the book will become obsolete eventually as they do point tweaks and things like that in the future, this part, the part that has a whole bunch of content that we're going to go through today and talk about, will stand the test of time. You can keep this on your shelf and it will be useful in the future. Now, laying the groundwork out, this video is not going to be me just reading the book to you. I'm going to read a few things as we talk about some of the new modes of play and army building that they've presented to us. If you want things to just be read to you, there are other YouTube channels that will do that and put you to sleep soundly the way that you like. But for me, I want to talk about the value of things. I did that with the Forbidden Power set, and it was very well received in terms of, is this worth your money? What kind of value does this add to your hobby? I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. It adds a ton. In fact, on the note of spoilers, when this General's Handbook, the last one, the one that we're currently living in the era of before the release of 2019, my general thoughts on the book were, it felt like a matched play focused edition. By that I mean, it seemed very focused on match play scenarios, allegiance abilities, points, and there wasn't as much love given to open and narrative play. Compared to like the first General's Handbook, which I felt like was just so exciting for narrative and open play, and there was also points. However, I will say up front that I think this year's General's Handbook, I think sets the bar for where they could be in terms of supporting each thing individually, and very, very well giving you, if you just love one of those types of things above all others. For me, example, I love narrative play more than competitive matched play. There's a ton in here for me. That being said, the fact that they split things up with the points separately, it felt like very devoted support to those respective game types. It didn't feel like it's leaning too heavily into one or the other. What that means on a practical level is that there's just something for everyone in this book. So that being said, we're going to go to the downward cam and we're going to just go through the book talking about the various sections and the way it supports things and kind of get the most out of it. I will be talking about the open, narrative, and matched play sections all individually, because they all have new things that are really, really exciting. At the end, I will touch on points, but honestly, like, I'm not one of those people who, when something is changed by 20 points, does it dramatically change the nature of an army? I don't think that way in terms of competitive play. I've always been a narrative-focused guy on this channel, so I can talk about the stuff that does excite me, like the changes to Stormcast, because I'm playing them now, and a few other factions that I've played before, but in general, it's not going to be a points discussion. That's for, the Honest Wargamer, Warhammer Weekly, those guys who focus on the competitive level. I'll try to remember to leave links to their channels down below, because if that's something that interests you, really they do provide that kind of content very well. Okay, here we are at the downward cam. Of course, we're looking at the main General's Handbook, not the points things, which we'll get to. We'll talk about it a little bit. I'll throw that off to the side. First things first, that really caught my eye when you open this book, they had something new. You see, in the first, page 4 and 5, they introduced a thing called the Player's Code. Now, they've had little intro sections before talking about the nature of the game, but basically, think of this as a code of conduct that people can agree with their players. And what it is GW never really tends to lean into telling people how to play their game. This is just saying, hey, if you want to have a good experience and set reasonable expectations to have a great time with your opponent, here's a few things that you can do to keep in mind. I think these are fantastic if you have a gaming group. This should be your group's rules. And it's just simple stuff, like be kind to your opponent, show up on time, ask permission before touching your opponent's miniatures, don't deliberately waste someone's time, never, let's see, what is it? Never complain about your bad luck, your opponent's good luck. That's a fun one. Half the battle report channels on YouTube would shut down after that one. But you get the idea of what I'm saying. The idea is, I just like that they set the tone for this edition by saying, here's how, no matter what type of game you play, you can have a good time with another human being. I don't know. It really made me stop and like read over it. So, one of the new things that came out in this book is the Open War Army Generator. So it used to be that for Open War, their literal rule for how to build your army was take whatever you want from your Games Workshop miniatures collection. And of course, we've learned that that's not really a way to have a fun experience with your opponent. I am not someone who thinks that you need points for a game. I enjoyed this game before points came out. However, points are a language. They allow you to talk to your opponent reasonably and say, this is the kind of experience we want to have, even if the points are not the same. Like I take 1,000 points of Gristlegore, you get 2,000 points of Kharadron Overlords. That's fine, but we're communicating what kind of game we want to have, right? And how we think about those factions. But that didn't exist with Open Play before, but now they've given us a kind of pseudo-language. And by that I mean the Open War Army Generator. You'll be able to create forces randomly or choose from little templates and kind of dictate how these battles are going to look. So how does the Army Generator work? Because it's so broad, you can take whatever you want. Let's just think about this. So basically what they do is they say, hey, walk up to your opponent and say, what size of game do we want to have? I mean, and they basically break it down to small, medium, large, and they give you some ideas. Like a small game would take about maybe like an hour. What is it? A game with a small force can be completed in an hour or two. Medium is 2 to 3 hours, and a large force is a full afternoon, is what it says. And they give you this little table. You pick the size, small, medium, large, and it gives you something called a force point limit, and that'll become important in later. And next to that is a typical number of units, meaning about how many units would your army consist of, to give you a sense of like if someone's new and they have just a few things, what they could bring. Now, of course, at any time, if you are playing someone who doesn't have a lot of options, a brand new player, doesn't understand the match play stuff, whatever, they can just take whatever they want, of course, and then you can use something like this to kind of match them, right? You randomize your force and make it a fun experience. So that's kind of the idea, is at any given time you can just choose something, but this is, again, a generator if you want it. And the way that works is you're going to roll a d66. How this works is you take 2 dice, you roll 1, that counts as your tens, and the second one counts as your single digit. So if you roll a 3 and a 4, that becomes 34. And that's how you make your d66. I'm not going to go into the uber nitty-gritty. There are a lot of cool stuff when it comes to substitutions and the way Open War cards work, because it it builds on the existing Open War rules. But basically, you turn the page and you get this. This is your army generator. Everything is numbered, so 11, 12, and it goes all the way to D66. And it's pretty stinking cool. So let's say I was going to build a small force, right? My force point limit is 15 at this level. And then I would roll a bunch of D66s, and from this I would generate an army. And so let's say I rolled, we'll do 34, I already said that one. So 34 would be 1 champion, and the terms they give are defined here, and we'll talk about that in a second. So 1 champion and 2 regular units, or 1 elite unit in any combination. So it could be 1 regular, 1 elite, 2 regulars, 2 elites. And so the way that works, the wording they use, champion is a hero that is not a monster. Okay, there's tons of those. That's kind of awesome. And then it says regular, a unit of up to 10 models, each with a wound characteristic of 1 and a save characteristic of 3, 4, or 5 up. So your basic infantry in the game are going to be like that. Having 1 wound really does kind of level the playing field here. And then the elite version of that is a unit of up to 5 models, each with a wound characteristic of 2 or 3. So, for example, if you're playing Seraphon, you would have like Skinks and Saurus Warriors. They're all 1 wound models that have a save of 4 or 5 up. Actually, that's not true. So the Horde would be the Skinks because they have a save of a 6, I think. But anything with a save of a 5 up, that's your, I believe your clan rats even, something like that. I don't know all the unit stats. But for me, this is something I can talk about that I actually know, would be Stormcast, and they would count as an elite. Even though a Liberator is my basic battle line, in the context of this definition, he's an elite guy. Why? Because he's in a 5-man unit, right? A unit of 5 models with a wound characteristic of 2 or 3. That's how they define that. So I think that's pretty cool. So we'll just pick some other ones so you can kind of see. This one here, 26, is funny. 1 champion, so just a hero, and an endless spell. That's awesome. I like that. And they get pretty big. So at the bottom of each of these things, it tells you how many force points it uses. So like we said before, I chose to play a small game. I get 15 force points. I roll my D66. I got that 34. That costs 3. So now all of a sudden I have 12 left. So I just keep rolling that D66, and this builds my army for me. There are some, like I said, there's some in-depth rules and mechanics, like strengthen units. Some of these things can be bolstered, meaning I could take larger units of Liberators or larger units of other guys. Really what this kind of like, I guess, matrix is, it's just a bunch of random configurations between 2 heroes, a Gargantuan model, what is it, a bunch of elites, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So let's talk about the unit type table, how they define the different kinds of things. First one is Horde, which is a unit of up to 20 models, each with a wounds characteristic of 1 and a save of 6+ or dash. So there's quite a few things there. Lots of the little guys that die pretty quickly. Regular we covered, it's 10 models with a save of 3, 4, 5. Elite we already covered, 5 model unit with a save characteristic of 2 or a wounds characteristic of 2 or 3. Above that is Guard, a unit of up to 3 models, each with a wound characteristic of 4 or 5. So think of something like, I believe that's Morghast Archai, I think. I don't play a lot of things, but definitely could be, so Stormcast is what I know. That would be up to 3 models, each with a wound characteristic of 4 or 5. So I'm thinking Paladors. Linebreaker, a unit of 1 model with a wounds characteristic of between 6 or 9 that is not a hero. Linebreaker. Let me think about what that would be. I just had it, so I was trying to think of Stormcast stuff that I know. Celestar Ballista is not a hero. It's a unit of 1 model, and its characteristic, wounds characteristic is between 6 or 9. Gargantuan is a unit that is 1 model, has a wound characteristic of 10 or more, so think something big like a Gargant or something like that. Champion is hero that is not a monster, so a guy usually on foot. And then a Conqueror is any hero, so it could be something like a Zombie Dragon or something like that, a hero with a Zombie Dragon ride. So that is how I like this. That's how they articulate how units are in the game. And this is all just for open play. None of this matters anything else, but they had to break down how do we describe and define units and their roles and stuff like that. And I think they did a fantastic job. So I'm actually super excited about this, not because it adds something to open play that just didn't exist before. But if I wanted to build a cool story arc where I had opposing forces that weren't the same size, and I just wanted to mix it up and play with stuff that I never played before, this is a great way to do that. It's also, say, a new person, they're doing like a Path to Glory or something like that. This is a way to just have games that even have a chance of being fair, on top of the other open play stuff. So I think that is a slam dunk. I love it. As far as Open War continued, they also introduced all different kinds of new terrain options for open play. And this could be stuff they have here, walls and fences, the rules for the Citadel Wood. There's just all kinds of stuff. And what it really is just more opportunities to make your board interesting for narrative, for open play, I should say. And they give you a few ways. This is all like a design idea of like places you can put terrain to make it really impactful for the game if you want to use really, really intense terrain stuff. Now, I always love the open war deployments and that kind of stuff because it gives you very unique ways to set up you and your opposing force. And this is no different. It's the same thing. It's just for terrain. So you have like, this is a super cool circle. So if you wanted to do a narrative mission where someone's like trying to stop a ritual, maybe the ritual's happening in the center and everyone has to come and stop it. Here's just like a wall of trees, could be like fortifications, that kind of stuff. I won't spend much time on this. It's just cool ways to set up your board. And then they also introduced this thing that they announced called the Close Quarters Battle Generator. Now they got rid of the open war like deck. No, like not the deck of cards is still valid, but I mean like the pre-made deployments and that kind of stuff, and replaced it with this. And what's cool about these things is table size really doesn't matter. The idea was that we saw in the preview article that for this, like you could play on a coffee table. How do we talk about Warhammer in a way that is divorced from a 4x6 table, right? And so that's exactly what this is. It's like whatever space you're playing on, cut it in half, cut it diagonal, cut it, horizontal, vertical. This is a spearhead deployment. This is someone's trapped in the center. And so I like it. There are a few measurements I hear to give you ideas, but it's not tied to a 4x6 table. And that's kind of the idea. It also goes over the basic open war rules as far as like, hey, if one person is significantly above you in the number of units that you have, you get special rules and special victory condition, that kind of stuff. I love it all, but it's been talked about to death, so I won't go over it. Again, this is your special victory options and conditions and stuff like that. Super cool. They also introduced this idea of hidden agendas. That is to say, you get bonus victory conditions and stuff like that you don't tell your opponent. I love these. I loved these in the old edition of 40k. It's one of my favorite things. I've snatched victory from the hands of defeat many a time doing all kinds of random objectives and stuff like that. I haven't explored them all in detail. I just got this book and I'm very excited. So I'm going to do that pretty soon. And I do want to have an open play game on the channel at some point just to kind of go through and show you that with the army building things they came up with before, there's a lot more ways to construct a fun experience with open play gaming. And then we move on to narrative play. Kicking off narrative play, they give us what's called the Streets of Death. This is close approximation to like the Cities of Death type thing that 40k has, where you're fighting in these tight, narrow corridors. I think this is a perfect thing that they released with the new terrain kits they have, where the buildings aren't amazingly tall. We know that the Warcry stuff coming out soon is going to be add some like verticality, if you will, raise things up, second floors and stuff like that. But you can fill a table very quickly with those terrain kits, and so it becomes much more confined. And so that's kind of the idea, is how do we represent fighting specifically in a city? If you've been following the lore videos, you know that one of the things we read about in the Slaanesh Battle Tome was that Slaanesh manipulated the Stormcast to kill the civilians in a number of Order cities. And so those fights would be really cool to recreate. How do we make a living city siege happen? Not a siege like from the outside, but from the inside as you're storming the keep. So basically the entire thing is just giving you really cool rules for attacker-defender missions, which I think is the hallmark of a good narrative type of thing. And so what you get is rules for buildings. You get demolition to be able to destroy said buildings. You get stuff like plumbing out of the gutters, fighting in narrow streets, the idea of sewer fighting. There's just all kinds of stuff. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail every single one of these things. There are people who will read the book for you, but the idea is just simple bolt-on rules. If you're already playing a game and you're like, we have this cobblestone gaming mat, why not play it here? This is really cool stuff. What I love is that, where is it at? I'm gonna oh yeah, actually one thing I do want to cover, I love the idea of it. They give you rules for barricades. So if you're attacking and defending, the guy who's defending gets all kinds of cool stuff. He can really use the environment to his advantage. Where's I'm kind of skipping ahead, sorry about that. One thing they do is they go over the lore of Elixia the Shattered City. Now if you don't remember from the Realmgate Wars, which is the opening act of Age of Sigmar, during the Quest for Galmaraz book, the forces of Stormcast are trying to find the Hammer Galmaraz, and they come upon this city called Elixia, and it's just a ruined mess. But this basically, combining all the narrative stuff, gives you a little mini campaign to fight for Elixia. Now, of course, these work for any city, but what I'm saying is the cool city fight rules on top of this are friggin' legit. So it kind of all rounds up into something. So we'll talk about that in a second, but I thought it was cool to give you an idea of like where all these rules are going. And it's to a really neat campaign thing that gives you new ways to fight. So again, attacker, defender, you can set things on fire, which is great, like buildings and terrain pieces. And this one's remove the burning marker, so you can put fires out and that kind of stuff. Really neat. Basically, as far as the actual rules for this kind of stuff, if you are attacking, you don't really want to have a ton of monsters because they're so big that they get choked in these tight corridors. But if you have lots of infantry, that's where the real action is. And so you want to be the defender with the monsters, and attackers have great numbers of infantry and stuff like that. So it's really cool. You will see that on our channel, I promise you. So moving past that, again, these are just more rules for, you know, hidden defenders and that kind of stuff in the city. We come to this thing that when I saw the preview article for it, got me pumped, and that is arcane objectives. Now, in Age of Sigmar, when we're playing most of our games, objectives are kind of a not thing, right? They're kind of this amorphous point on the board that doesn't really exist, but we need to stand there next to it, basically, and capture it. But what this does is says, no, those things that we're fighting over have effects, positive and negative, which I think makes a great deal of sense. There are 12 of them. The preview article said 11, and I was like, how do you get 11 on a D6 or 2D6? But there's 12 of them, and some of them are good, like it heals nearby troops, and some are terrible in that it's like a trapped, objective that someone had sabotaged it somehow. And so I think it adds another dimension. I want this to be in almost every game because it gives you really fun decision points as far as, am I willing, with this, this unit of storm vermin that has 2 dudes left because Battle Shock almost wiped them out, and I go have them cap that objective. Is it worth the fact that it could be trapped and they blow up? You know what I mean? Or conversely, they could regain 2 rats to their unit. And so it's just kind of this fun, it just adds a little bit of tension with very little rules bolted on. So I don't know, I like it. Some of the highlights here. Let's see. One of them is basically gives you a 5-up save after a save, so it's a cool little shield basically. Healing light, you can heal D3 wounds to a unit. This objective is counted as being 2 objectives to the army that controls it if the army has a chaos or destruction general. That is super fun. It's just a super awesome weapon, and if it's in the hands of the wrong person, it swings the battle. I like that kind of stuff. So with that being done, we move into the Regiments of Renown. Now, the Regiments of Renown was a really cool thing that was in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, where I've seen it in the context of tournaments, where you take a unit, everyone gets a free unit in their army that has the same stats, but over the course of the game, as they're surviving and winning and that kind of stuff, they evolve and change and become something cool. As every round they get bonus rules and stuff like that, and they're all very different. Well, this is something similar. It is purely for narrative play, and the idea is, if you are doing a narrative campaign or game with your friends and you have a unit that's supposed to, in your guys' lore, be special, unique, or deadly, how do you represent that without breaking the game? And so what this fundamentally is a series of rules. They're all D6 table. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, and each of them is bonuses that apply to an entire unit. And so, for example, if I had, my Celestial Vindicator Stormcast there, and we called in, the Lord Aquilor, right? The Lord Aquilor amongst all Lord Aquilors, and he's just super, super cool. I would pick one of these things, and he would get that bonus rule on top of his existing War Scroll. And they do make it very clear. They suggest you either choose or roll for them. Sorry, I had to stop. There's a dog barking. You can choose or roll for them. And there are cool different tables. So there's your basic Regiments of Renown, and then there's specialist ones, where if you have a unit that you want to express a very specific skill set. So you have Spearhead, and they all have restrictions. So The first one, Regiment of Renown table, that works for literally anybody. The Spearhead Specialist unit must have a save characteristic of 3, 4, or 5, and must have a mount. So that's super interesting. That's like gonna be all your cavalry dudes. Your Spearhead makes perfect sense. Specialist table Scouts unit must have a save characteristic of 5 or 6 or dash and not have a mount. So this is your very lightly armored going forward as Scouts. Outriders unit must have a save characteristic of 5 or 6 or dash and have a mount. So this is your skirmishers. It's called Outriders. So think Marauder Horsemen or something like that. Specialist table Juggernaut unit must have a save characteristic of 3, 4, or 5 and not have a mount. So you're thinking Paladins. What else? Some big ones. Grave Guard, something like that. Yeah, and then the last special table is Marksman. You must be armed with at least one missile weapon. So I think of my Vanguard Hunters, right? I could give them a huge buff with their shooting. So all kinds of cool stuff. Basically, you can do... And so this is just... it's a general table of saying, here's some cool ideas for buffs to units and some restrictions around what kind of units would use these kinds of rules. And I like that. The thing is, it doesn't tell you, if you're doing a campaign after every game, they should get one. Nope, it's just there for you to use or not use. If you have a unit that you think deserves to be cool or special, pick something here. This is also, I think, a great place if you and your opponent want to recreate something that's in the lore. So, for example, Gardas versus a bunch of Nurgle demons like in the Rumgate Wars. Well, there's no model for Gardas at all. So you would look at this table, pick something that you think really represents what his character brings to the table. You can pick one, you can pick multiple, whatever you want. They're just cool guidelines to say, here's how you can make a unit special. And that's all it is. You just pick your Lord Celestin model, you grab one of these or a couple of these, whatever you want to do, and just go nuts. And I like that. I like the fact that they didn't tell you what to do with it. It's just a tool in your toolbox as a narrative game maker. And that's pretty dope. And now this is the thing I previewed before where they're kind of telling you, okay, we can tie all these things together to make a pretty cool story. And I like that they do this. They give you a little bit of preface. So they're using this as an example. So they give you a little example of like information about Alexia the Shattered City and tell you, hey, in this campaign, you can make one of your units into a Regiment of Renown to reflect the glory they gain as the campaign rages on. After each game, you can make one roll on the Regiment's Renown table. To do so, you pick the unit, and then it has to meet all the restriction requirements and that kind of stuff we talked about before. So I think that is pretty stinking cool. What I like about it is, this specific campaign tells you, pick a unit, that's a Regiment of Renown, but you're not bound to that for all of them. Like I said, it's a tool in the toolbox. And then it goes into various narrative play missions. And I'll be honest with you, some of them are kind of interesting in terms of they're all kind of named with like Alexia themes. The Silver Maiden was a prominent character in that story. Some of them, you're probably going to want a 4x8 table. I know the open play stuff had missions that kind of fit everything, but you will probably want a 4x8 table for some of these, just to space the objectives out. And what's cool is they include terrain in their description. So for example, I just passed it. This one has a monument in the center. You can use anything as a monument. And this one has a temple. Again, use anything. But as you can see, there's very cool, diverse deployment sections and that kind of stuff. I like when there's variety. In addition to that, there are some pretty cool stuff where they call them raids and ambushes, which was not mentioned at all in any of the preview stuff, but I love it. And so basically the idea is when you're playing your games and you want to create the sense of a force being outgunned, outclassed, or taken by surprise. Again, more bolt-on rules, but if you were to say, let's say we're not doing the campaign, right? We'll pick this one, Urban Peril. One guy is here, and this is just a normal guard outpost for free peoples, just minding their own business, and they suddenly get attacked by a whole bunch of Gloomspite Gits because the bad moon came up and no one was prepared for it. You can then bolt on the raids and ambush rules on top of that and saying like, You know, the Free Guild people, well, they have sentries. So they have guards standing by, of course. It's a fortification of humans. Why wouldn't they have guards at night? You know what I mean? And then, so you create this, it's just, again, like I said, bolt-on rules, goes on top of a normal game to make it attacker, defender, and a few cool little tidbits in there. So it's not super deep, it's just kind of stuff that you can add on to add a little flavor, but that's the whole point of narrative gaming. So we'll move on from there and talk about naming your heroes. It really is just a series of D6 charts to name your heroes. So of course, start off with Stormcast, and they're fun. I mean, you have what? I'm just gonna pick some random ones. Titus Eagle Fist. That, you know, there's a whole bunch of them. I'm not a huge fan of that one, but and there actually I could probably use that Skaven one to be perfectly honest with you, because that's coming up in an upcoming narrative campaign. So we got a whole bunch. I think I missed a page. Well, that's not all the factions. What do we got? Stormcast, Slaves to Darkness, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, Skaven, Ironjaws, Gloomspite, Identity Kim, and Nighthaunt. But oh, I wish there was a Carriage and Overlords and a Fire Slayer. That'd be kind of nice. And of course, the thing that has been exploding the internet is mercenary companies. And they've talked about this. I'm not going to read the detail on all of these. If you haven't seen my review of Forbidden Power when I did that one, basically the way it works is these act as allies, but more complicated. You can only have one for every 4 units of your main force. They take points out of your ally pool, so usually 400 in a 2,000 point game. If you're doing match play, narrative play, you can do whatever you want. Just do whatever you want. But for match play, that kind of stuff, there are, I think, 10 of them total. And I'm just going to read off what the names of them and what's in them. But one thing that came out when they had a preview article about it was people saying it's kind of like a battalion because you have to take certain things. And there are some of these where you have to take certain things, but it's not like, for example, people were talking about the mercenary company that had the Sons of the Lichmaster, which has a necromancer, zombies or skeleton warriors, and a corpse cart. And people were like, well, that's a lot of points on crap units, basically, with no support. Well, the only requirement is the necromancer. So if you just want to splash a necromancer in, you could do that. You don't. It says 0 to 3 units of zombies or skeleton warriors, and 0 to 1 corpse cart. So that's kind of an interesting thing where it's not there's not a minimum really. The minimum is very low, I should say. There is a minimum, but it's very low. And so I wanted to clarify that. But basically, we have the Greyfeared Mercenary Company and the Tenebrous Court, which is Flesh Eater Courts. We mentioned those in the Forbidden Power book. Sons of Listmaster is your Necromancer, which can take zombies or skeletons in a corpse cart. You have the Blood-Drenched Rose Mercenary Company, which is your Blood Knights. Only requirement here is that you take 1 unit of Blood Knights, but you could optionally take a Vampire Lord, which is cool. Grug Brothers Mercenary Company, which is 1 to 3 Gargants, Ale Guzzler Gargants, which I might actually do just for the lulz. And then there's the, okay, I'm gonna get this right, Nimyard's Rough Riders. I almost said Nimrod. And that one is your free people, the humans who sell themselves out. We'll certainly be having some of these. Yes, I know I can ally in free people, but I just want to model them the way I want to model them. And this one is, the only requirement is 1 unit of Free Guild Pistoliers. So a little bit of mobility action would pair well with some of those Regiments of Renown rules. I like that. You could optionally take 0 to 1 Free Guild Generals, but it must be mounted on a warhorse and it cannot have a stately banner because you're not fighting for a state. It's just you. You can have 0 to 1 Free Guild Outriders as well. Now, important thing to note, it gives you your minimum, what you have to take, and tells you some other options you get. What's interesting is that because you're taking these out of their faction, they get like a little allegiance ability for each one of these to support them. So for example, we talked about the Sons of the Lichmaster, a necromancer who can take 0 to 3 units of skeletons and zombies and a corpse cart. Their ability they get is Power of the Lichmaster. Add 1 to attacks characteristics of a weapon used by zombies or skeleton warriors from this mercenary company while they are wholly within 18 inches of the necromancer of the same company. All of them have something like that. The vampire one is don't take battle shock tests, just period. And I like that because there's no hero to kind of bounce things off of. But yeah, for all of them, you have a minimum, a maximum, a limited pool of units, and they all get a special rule, kind of like an allegiance ability. If you do take them, and this applies to matched play and narrative play, you do not get a command point the first battle round, which is huge. Let's see. So, the other ones, I'll just read them off real quickly. There's the Black Smoke Battery, which is your cannons. So, a minimum of 1 cannon or organ gun, up to 3. And there's 0 to 1 Cogsmith, 0 to 1 Gyrocopter, Gyro Bomber. Rampager's Mercenary Company, which is Chaos Marauders, which is interesting. I guess to kind of fill in the void of, like, we've read it in some of the Dark Oath books that have come out, like War Queens. They just kind of sell their services out. So it's 0 to 1 Dark Oath Chieftain or War Queens and 1 to 3 units of Marauders. That's funny. Scrog's Menagerie Mercenary Company, which is 1 Chaos Gargant at the minimum. Okay, so we already have something similar. But it's 0 to 3 units of Chaos Spawn, Chaos Warhounds, and or Furies. And we know that Furies are getting a new model in Warcry coming out soon. So that's kind of funny. Just a bunch of monsters. And then there's the Gut Stuffers Mercenary Company. And that is 1 Firebelly and 1 unit of Man-Eaters minimum, which is probably the highest minimum here in terms of number of units. But it can go 1 to 3 on the Man-Eaters. So it's just a whole lot of people who are very hungry. And that moves us into matched play. Now, I'm going to be very upfront and say that match play is not my specialty. The thing that makes tournaments, fair and balanced and all that kind of stuff, it's not my thing. I prefer narrative play. I like goofy rules. I like when stuff gets out of hand. A lot of this page is just introducing you to the concepts of list building within in the confines of having a balanced force with your opponent. I think is probably the best way to say it. They do give you some rules on faction terrain, the basic scenery rules. They have expanded, I like this, the Triumph table. It used to just be a D3, you get one of those things. Those ones are still there, but they expanded them a little bit. For example, 1 Triumph is Cunning, one of the new ones. Once per battle, when you use a command point, you can say that you are being cunning. If you do so, you do not have to spend a command point to use the command ability this time. That's a fun one. You know what I mean? Just give somebody essentially a free command point. This is if you have less points than your opponents in their army, and I like that. There's probably some minor things there that I need to reread, like the scenery rules and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, it's all there. So, things that they've added is your command abilities. So the command abilities right now are currently so I guess I should say the command abilities you have in the base game. Okay, that's pretty simple that we all have is immunity to battle shock. You pick a unit near a hero, more range if it's a general, and they get to auto pass a battle shock test. When they make run rolls, they can turn it into a 6, even if they already rolled it. And the last one being reroll charges. Okay, you get to reroll a single charge roll for a command point. What they've done is added a couple more, and they're pretty darn cool. They're very simple. One is all-out attack. You pick a unit, and it gives you the same measurements for being near a hero or a general. You can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by that unit until the end of the phase. Again, this happens in the combat phase. All-out defense, which is pretty much the same thing at the start of the combat phase, but it's for your save rolls. Reroll save rolls of 1. And the last one is volley fire, and this one happens in the shooting phase, and it's very much the same. But you can you pick a unit, and that unit can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made during that shooting phase. So it's 3 more command abilities that are bolt-on. You pick a unit near a hero, more range of it your general, and you get to reroll ones to do something. Which, it may not sound like a lot, but I'll tell you what, if you do stuff like a Cunning Ruck and you have the reroll ones to hit, it's not bad. And there's other ways to get reroll ones and that kind of stuff. That's just an example of just a bucket load of shots that all of a sudden reroll ones means a whole lot. Witch Elves with the rerolling ones to hit, just anything that generates an immense amount of tax, especially if you were to say shoot to get a triumph and your triumph was being cunning, and all of a sudden you're not spending that command point. I don't know. It's cool stuff. It's little things. There's more options in the toolbox. I'm not going to say it's game breaking. One thing that I did like was they actually doubled the number of scenery rules. A lot of folks don't like scenery rules because it's just kind of complicated stuff. I personally love them. So on the left here, You have your classic 6, Damned, Arcane, Inspiring, Deadly, Mystical, and Sinister. What they did is just added a second table. And so when you're generating these things, you roll a die, and what is it? How do they break this up? Basically, it's like on a 1 through 3, it's this table. On a 4 through 6, it's this one. That's functionally how it goes. But the new ones are pretty cool. For example, there's one of them I read that I really liked. Overgrown models are not visible to each other if an imaginary straight line, 1 millimeter wide, drawn between the closest points of the two models crosses over more than 1 inch of any overgrown terrain feature. It just blocks line of sight. Volcanic at the start of each hero phase on a roll of dice. Volcanic terrain feature. On a 6, each unit within 1 inch of that terrain feature suffers D3 mortal wounds. So it's just more cool stuff. I like that. And then we go into the missions. And I like about this is, so they recycled a lot of the names for the missions, but then they put this nice little thing in the top corners here for 2019, let you know it's updated. Now here's the thing, I haven't played all the match play missions. I do a lot of narrative stuff, like I said before, so I'm not familiar with the tweaks and changes to all these. It looks like the deployment zones were changed quite a bit in some of them. The one that I know the most is Battle for the Past. It's my favorite new player demo one. Of course, instead of being straight across the center, they now changed it to being basically triangle deployments on the sides, which I think make it interesting because at this point you're not equally contesting for 2 and you have a safe one. Your safe one is closest to the enemy in terms of what's in your territory. I like that. And then Scorched Earth was one that caused a lot of my friends a lot of consternation. It used to be that the line came across the center here and there was enemy and yours. But basically they changed it to where it's half and half. So if you want to go all the way forward and burn all your opponent's objectives, like some of my buddies did, you would have to go through the entire enemy front line to get to the back ones, which is theoretically harder to do. So I'll kind of go past these. I'll just have them on the screen here. So if you see a change to deployment zones, I don't. But like I said, I just simply don't know the way everything used to be. I know shifting objectives used to be different in terms of the way it was laid out. But yeah, I don't know. It's pretty cool stuff. This one looks wacky. Relocation orb. They changed it instead of being the crazy grid. Now it's, yeah, it's still bouncing around, but it's always between these very, very set points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places it could be at any given time. So I like that. Places of Arcane Power is still there. Looks pretty much the same. So yeah. And then in the book here, it gives you a few ideas on how to run a tournament. Now, I'm going to be looking at this in more detail because locally I do want to run a tournament. But I'm going to basically skip it for now because I haven't read it in detail and it's a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff for TOs. And then we jump into something called meeting engagements. Now this is meant to be rule sets for playing the game at 1,000 points. And I'll be doing a video about this specifically because this is a game mode that excited me. But the idea was like, how can we take the experience of Age of Sigmar and turn it down to where 1K is kind of the norm? And they went through a very interesting way, and I thought it was going to be the restrictions like, limits on behemoths and unit sizes and that kind of stuff. Nope. They went a very different route where basically you break your army into 3 different segments. You break it into, what are the words they used? Spearhead, main body, and rear guard units. They have a nice little handy roster thing on the back of the book, which is easy to photocopy, I guess, but kind of a pain to have it right there. But you break it up, every one of those segments has to have a unit, at least one unit in there. There's some restrictions on what units and how big they can be in each one of them. But basically every turn, more of your army comes on the board. So you start the game with only your spearhead units, and then in turn, I think it's I believe it's turn 1. No, it has to be turn 2, I think. Your main body comes in, and then after that, it's your rear guard. So basically, your army is coming on over time. I may have gotten the turns wrong, but whatever. You know what I mean. The army is assembling as the game is going on. You can use a smaller table size. You get 1,000 points, hard limit. And it kind of clarifies you can only pay the points for one end of the spell in a meeting engagement. That's kind of cool. And that's basically how it works. They kind of just took the experience of a 2K game and broke it up with a few adjustments to what you can take. No units are off the table. You can still play in Nagash. You just have to have at least 3 units of army, 1 to fill each of the engagement slots, and that you can yeah, make it work. Some of the things you can have double-sized units, meaning as it is base, everything is the base size unit. So a Plague Monks or 10 dude unit. With this, you can double it to 20. So it kind of puts a cap. So there's no like uber units of clan rats or something like that. And I'm going to talk about more on that in a separate video and go over it in detail. But that's just kind of the basic idea of how you can do that. So they go into a few more battle plans. And these are specific to the 1K, you know, the meeting engagements thing. I hate that name, meeting engagements, but whatever. I mean, that sounds like a coffee date. But yeah, there are some cool looking ones. You know, what they do basically is they're very simple missions with, you know, 1 or 2 objectives. There's a few, there's one with 4. But what they do is they play with where you have to deploy your waves. So like this one's pretty simple. It's the simplest one there is. And you can just start on your side of the table. You're fighting over the center objective. Cool. That's actually probably the primo demo for Age of Sigmar. Beyond that, like Death Pass here, if you look, you each have your table side and an objective, but when you start, your spearhead unit comes in the fat side, your main body comes up here, and your rear guard comes in the south. So it just splits up the ways that you can deploy your force, and I like that. And all of them are pretty similar to that. So I don't know, I think it's cool stuff. Whether or not it's gonna catch like fire, there's certainly enough support for it mission-wise for it to really take off. Whether or not it actually will is up to players. Let's see. I'm gonna give you an idea for tournaments regarding if you wanted to play a tournament that was specifically for 1K. Just a few tweaks and ways that you can make stuff. They kind of walk you through it, and I kind of like it. And the last thing here is talking about the actual allegiance abilities of the various factions. And I'm just going to run through these very, very quickly. So you got Darkling Covens, and it doesn't look like anything was really added in terms of like a new spell lore, nothing like that. Some of them got tweaks, but for the most part, that's the same. You have Dispossessed, which is you pick your grudge. We have Free People. I don't think they have any wizards, actually, now I think about it. But pretty cool stuff. I mean, I think they still have their Great Companies. That's what they're called, yeah. Great Companies. I like it, where you can countercharge and hurt each other. Seraphon. Now, I'm not a Seraphon player. I do believe there was... I was told there were some tweaks to the cost of Seraphon units or something. That might be wrong. Don't worry about it. Don't hold me against it if you do. But they also get a unique spell lore. What's interesting that I read... let me see if I can find this. Here we go. This is called Contemplation of the Ancient Ones. At the end of your hero phase, you can pick one friendly Slann wizard and replace the spell they know from the spell lore with a new spell from the spell table. Choose or roll. So basically, your Slann once per turn, at the end of their turn, after they've had a chance to cast what they're currently using, they can actually choose a different spell lore. That is a really cool thing. Now, I haven't gone into these in detail. Seraphon player would know how well they interact with their faction, but that is a unique thing where you can choose the spell they start with, cast it, cast their own spell, or, you know, use them to get Seraphon summoning points, and then at the end of the turn be like, you know what, I don't need that anymore this round. Next round I'm going to need something else, and then just pick something else out of your toolbox. Super dig that. Awesome job, G-dubs. Of course, you have your battalions again. Wanderers, I don't think they got anything new. Nope. Slaves to Darkness certainly doesn't look new. You still got your Aura of Chaos power. Yeah, reroll, wound rolls, yep, so that looks all pretty much the same for the most part. Ironjawz got a unique spell lore for all of the, what's it called? Oh, I just call it the Ironjawz spell lore. I always love the unique names like the Wog on Wild or something crazy like that. So that's cool. You choose one for each of the wizards in your army, so it's going to be your weird boys, or whatever they are, weird boy shaman, whatever that. And that is the end of the book. Like I said, ends with the meeting engagement roster. So let's chat about this. This has been an incredibly long video, but basically what I want to talk away, my takeaway from this book, is each of these sections has something to offer. The way that they redid open play to include the army generator, I think is going to make that a much more viable way to get games in, because it gives you and your opponent a language to be able to play games well, especially with new folks, and I love it. The way that they did narrative play with the city fighting, regiments of renown, and arcane objectives, all of those things, I love them. I'm going to be doing all of them. You're going to see them on this channel in the narrative battle reports. In fact, I'm planning with a patron a way to do a narrative gaming report between Skaven Pestilence and my Celestial Vindicators. We will absolutely be using a ton of rules from this thing because attacker, defender, and ambush and that kind of stuff, all of those things are going to play into that little mini campaign that I'm putting together. For matched play, the fact that they introduced an entirely new set of ways to play, meaning the 1K army style, and then fully supported it with its own missions, its own flavor, its own way of running events and stuff like that is awesome. Now, whether or not that'll take off, I leave in the hands of the community. I want to see it thrive because you can cram, instead of doing a 3-game, 1-day event, you can get more games in of a 1K event that's split up like that. Games will go faster, and so you can do a lot more in a single day. Now, I want to do a brief note on the points here. Basically, I don't have a whole lot to say because, like I said, I don't evaluate like the granular point changes and stuff like that. All I know is the factions that I've played before, and so the fact that they've moved away from everything being increments of 20 to now being 10s is actually huge. If you don't know what I'm talking about, something they always used to, when the game first came out with points, was like 240 went to 260 and 260 went to 280 or back to 240. You know what I mean? It was always increments of 20 for the most part. And now they've changed it to where now they're doing 10s. And so that adds a little bit more like levers to pull when it comes to like, is it really worth 20 points more? Especially if it's a larger unit you can grow and, add a bunch of dudes to it and stack those on. So there's a lot more levers to pull. I'm happy because I love the Vanguard stuff. If you've been following the channel, doing a lot of Stormcast Vanguard with the Paladors and the Hunters, all those saw a points reduction. And then the stuff about Stormcast that you see a lot, like Sequitors and Evocators, they had a points increase, which is fair. Whether or not people are going to be happy, I can just tell you right now, there's going to be people who are unhappy. That's just the way of it. Everyone thinks that something is broken. Gristlegore is broken. This is broken, whatever like that. The only thing I really want to add on points here is that this is an incomplete list. If you didn't see the article coming out on Games Workshop, basically this is everything from, I think, let me see, I don't think Gloomspite Gets is included. It is nothing from this year, is my understanding. No, they were not updated. So basically, if it came out in 2019, it's not in this book. There are points in this book, but they're not the updated ones. There's going to be an FAQ that comes out, a free digital download, which I'll try to link in this video when it's released. And basically, those newer factions will have kind of a more up-to-date points increase. Part of it is production time. It takes a lot of time to print these things, package them together, get them shipped worldwide. So I get it. It's fine. I'd rather have, even that's kind of scattered and updates like that. I'm not a fan of FAQs coming out online like that because it's just more stuff to kind of keep track of. The fact that they're willing to do that so quickly and do it for free for all the newer stuff, you can't be mad about it. So I really do appreciate it. I think overall, this is probably the best General's Handbook that's come out since the first one in terms of supporting all different types of play. And adding something significant to each one of them. Army generator, city fighting, and then 1K battles, missions for every single one of them. It doesn't take anything away from the older editions. It simply adds to them, and I absolutely love it. So friends, thank you so much for listening to me ramble for the last however long this will be after I edit it. And thank you so much. If you have questions about it that aren't specific, like I'm not going to tell everyone exactly what every single point thing is, but if you have questions about the very specific types of play and stuff like that, please ask them in the comments below. I'd love to respond. As I said before, you will be seeing some of these things make their way onto the channel in terms of an in-depth review on the 1K point level games. The narrative stuff's going to happen in narrative battle reports that I have planned out and I'm very excited about. Thank you for watching. Happy wargaming.